The first thing the surveyors noticed was the smell. Not rot, not damp, something older, like iron left too long in the rain. They had come up the ridge to mark timber, 3 men with a satellite unit and a lunch pail between them, and by the time they reached the clearing at the top, only 2 of them were still speaking. The third had stopped 10 yards back and would not step past the tree line. He said later that the building did not look wrong from the outside, it looked wrong from the inside out. And when the county sent people to verify what the surveyors had found, half of them refused to go back a second time. Before we dive in, press subscribe and let us know where in the world you are watching from. The ridge sits inside a stretch of the Kentucky and Tennessee border country that the Forest Service has left mostly unmapped since the 1950s. Not because it is protected, and not because it is dangerous in any of the ways a hiker would understand, but because the survey crews sent up there over the decades kept coming back with incomplete work. Compasses that spun a full turn every few steps. Radios that pulled in nothing but a low buzzing that some of the older men said sounded like breathing. Small, consistent failures of a sort that make supervisors stop assigning that district and quietly move on. The timber crews knew there was a clearing at the top. They had seen it from the air. What they did not know was that there was a building in it. The building is a church. That much is agreed on by everyone who has seen it. It has a steeple, or the frame of one, and the outline of a cross above the door. It has clapboard siding that has been painted white so many times that the paint sits nearly a 1/4 inch thick in places, the newer layers cracking and curling back from the older ones like scales. The roof is intact. The windows are intact. The bell in the tower is still hanging, and when the wind moves through the clearing the wrong way, it rings on its own, a single low note that carries down the ridge and dies before it reaches the trees. There is no road to it. No road has ever run to it, not in the earliest surveys, and not in any map since. The ground around it shows no path worn by feet, no evidence of foot traffic, no trash, no bottle caps, no shell casings, none of the small human residue that collects around any structure people actually use. But the paint is fresh. Someone repaints that church, and no one has ever seen them do it. The first documented visit was in 1982, when a Forest Service employee named Halloran took photographs of the exterior and filed them with a report that has since been reclassified twice. Halloran wrote that the structure appeared to be in active use and that he had chosen not to enter. He resigned from the service the following spring and did not give a reason. His photographs show a small white church in a mountain clearing, framed by dogwoods, and if you did not know where it was, you might think it was somewhere in rural Virginia or western North Carolina, one of the little chapels that dot the back roads down there. It looks ordinary. That is the first thing people mention. It looks ordinary until you stand next to it, and then it does not. The proportions are slightly wrong. The door is a few inches too tall for a person of average height, and the windows sit a few inches too low, so that a man standing inside would find the sill at his hip instead of his waist. The steeple leans about 2 degrees off vertical, not enough to look like damage, just enough that the eye keeps trying to correct it. The cross above the door is carved from a single piece of dark wood, and it is set upside down, and it has always been set upside down, in every photograph ever taken of the building, going back to the earliest ones. No one has ever turned it around. No one who has tried has gotten close enough to touch it. Inside is worse. The pews are arranged not in rows facing the pulpit, but in a spiral, tightening as they approach the center of the room, so that anyone sitting in the innermost pew would be seated with their back to the altar and their face toward the door. The wood of the pews is dark and heavy and has been carved along the arms and backs, with symbols that no researcher has been able to match to any known Appalachian folk tradition. They are not Cherokee, nor do they resemble any of the Scots-Irish settler traditions that shaped the region's mountain religion. Nothing in the small, syncretic groups that emerged in the 1800s around the coal camps matches them either. They belong to no tradition. They belong to nothing. The most common of the carvings is a circle with a vertical line through the center and a small notch cut at the top of the line, and it repeats down the arms of every pew, sometimes right side up and sometimes inverted, sometimes overlapping the one before it. A team of graduate students from a university in eastern Tennessee attempted to catalogue them in 2017. They counted the marks on the front 3 pews before their notebooks stopped keeping ink. Pens went dry. Pencils broke at the tip. The camera one of them had brought produced photographs in which the carvings simply were not present, though the pews themselves photographed cleanly. They left before finishing the 4th pew and did not publish their findings. The pulpit is empty. There is no Bible on it, no cloth, no candles. The wood is worn in a pattern that suggests someone has stood there for a very long time, weight shifted onto the left side, a slight groove pressed into the platform where a right foot has rested and rested and rested. But there is no dust anywhere. The floor is swept. The pews are polished. The windows are clean. Behind the pulpit, set into the wall where a cross might normally hang, is a rectangular panel of the same dark wood as the pews. It is roughly the size of a door. It does not open. When the first investigation team from the State University tried to examine it in 2004, their equipment failed. 2 cameras, 1 meter, and a small handheld recorder all stopped functioning within a foot of the panel and resumed working the moment they were carried back outside. The team lead, a folklorist named Coulter, wrote in her field notes that she believed the panel was hollow behind. She did not explain how she believed this. She died of a heart attack 6 weeks later at the age of 41. There is a story from the 1970s, told by a retired game warden named Cletus Barlow, before he died in 2010, that 2 brothers from the valley below the ridge went up hunting elk out of season in November of 1976. Both were experienced woodsmen. They knew the country better than most game wardens did. When they came down 2 days later, they had no elk and no rifles and would not speak to their own wives for a week. When the older brother finally spoke of it, in a bar in Harlan County months later, he said only that they had come out of the trees at the top of the ridge and seen the church, and that a lamp had been lit inside it, and that a woman had been singing. They had left their rifles because the older brother said he could not remember what a rifle was for while the singing was going on. Both brothers moved to Ohio the following spring, and neither ever returned to Kentucky. The younger brother later hanged himself in a garage in Toledo. The note he left said only that the singing had never stopped. People in the valley below the ridge have said for as long as there has been anyone to ask that on certain nights, when the wind is still and the moon is down, the bell in the tower can be heard ringing at the bottom of the valley, 1.5 miles below the clearing. Though there is no wind at that hour, and the bell only rings when the wind moves through it, the sound arrives long after it should. It carries the wrong direction. Older residents used to leave a candle burning in a west-facing window on nights the bell rang, though none of them, when asked, could say what the candle was for. They said their mothers had done it, and their grandmothers before them, and that was enough. The county records for the ridge are a mess. Deeds do not match. Parcel boundaries drawn in the 1890s do not line up with the parcels drawn 20 years later, and both sets of maps show a clearing at the top, but neither shows the church. The earliest tax records that mention any structure on the ridge appear in 1911, and they list it as a chapel belonging to a congregation whose name has been redacted from the original ledger with a heavy black bar. That redaction was made in ink. The ledger itself was written in pencil. Someone came back at a later date, opened the book, and struck out only that one line, and then closed the book and put it back on the shelf. The families who lived in the valley below the ridge in the 1800s are all gone. The last of them left in the winter of 1937, and their departure was not gradual. The census that year records 42 people living in the valley in January. By April, there were none, and none of them turned up in the neighboring counties. Their houses were left standing. Food was left on the tables. A cow was found alive in a barn 3 weeks later, still tethered, unhurt. The Kentucky State Police at the time opened a file, kept it open for 11 months, and then closed it without a stated cause. The file is now missing from the archive. A researcher who requested it in 2019 was told it had been checked out in 1964 and never returned. There is a story in the region, told mostly by older people and mostly reluctantly, that the church was there before the valley was settled, that the first white families who came into that country in the 1790s found it already standing, already painted, already empty, and that they left it alone and told their children to leave it alone, and that the trouble began when the trouble always begins, which is when someone stopped leaving it alone. A journal fragment from a Confederate deserter named Isaac Munn, held in a private collection in Louisville and dated to the summer of 1863, describes a night Munn spent hiding in the Ridge Country after fleeing his unit outside Chattanooga. He wrote that he had seen a white chapel in a clearing at the top of a rise, and that a man had come out onto the step and offered him shelter, and that he had refused the shelter because he had noticed, as the man raised a lantern to guide him in, that the man's shadow fell in the wrong direction. Munn wrote that he had walked the rest of that night without stopping, and that he had prayed continuously as he walked, and that when he had finally slept the following afternoon he had dreamed of the door of the church opening from the inside. The name attached to the trouble is a man called Elias Verrin. He is not in any official record. He appears only in a handful of family Bibles from the valley, always in the same entry format, always as a footnote to a death. Elias Verrin at the Ridge is the phrase that recurs. It is written next to the names of people who died young or died strangely, and it appears 7 times between 1812 and 1894. The Bibles do not agree on what Elias Verrin was. Some describe him as a preacher. Others describe him as a stranger who came through the valley one summer and stayed. One entry from the family Bible of a woman named Sarah Beecher, who died in 1861 at the age of 23, describes him as the man in the door. Beecher's diary, held now at a regional historical society, contains 3 entries about the ridge in the weeks before her death. She wrote that she had climbed to the top with 2 of her cousins during a summer picnic in 1859, and that she had put her ear to the panel behind the pulpit, and that a voice inside had said her name. She wrote that she had run all the way down, and that her cousins had not remembered any panel or any pulpit, and had teased her for weeks about her fright, and that she had begun to hear the voice at night, in her own bedroom, saying her name, and then saying, gently, that it was time to come home. The last entry in her diary, written the night before she died, reads simply, "Tonight, I answer." Modern investigators have found no record of any Verrin family in the census, in the tax rolls, in the church registers of any denomination that operated in the region in the 19th century. He is not in the muster rolls of the Confederate or Union armies. He is not in the coal company employment records. He is not anywhere except in those 7 Bible entries and in 1 photograph. The photograph was taken in 1893 by an itinerant portrait maker named William Cassidy, who moved through the Appalachians that year documenting mountain families. Cassidy's collection is held today at a small archive in eastern Kentucky, and the bulk of it is ordinary: weddings and funerals and stiff family groupings in front of cabins. One image in the collection is different. It shows the church. It shows the church exactly as it looks today. The same paint, the same lean in the steeple, the same upside-down cross above the door. And standing in the doorway is a man in a dark coat, his face in shadow, one hand raised. Cassidy's index card for the photograph is missing. Someone has written on the back of the print, in a hand that is not Cassidy's, the words, "He lets me take his picture." In the years since the church was formally documented, at least 11 people have gone missing on or near the ridge. The count depends on who you ask, and on how you define near. The Forest Service acknowledges 4. The county sheriff acknowledges 7. Local hunters and trappers, when they speak of it at all, put the number closer to 20. None of the missing have been found. There have been no remains recovered, no clothing, no gear, no signs of struggle. The searches turn up nothing. In 2011, a woman named Danielle Hoke, 29, disappeared from a marked trail 2 miles below the ridge. Her car was found at the trailhead. Her phone was found beside the car, powered on, with the last photograph she had taken still on the screen. It showed the top of the ridge. It showed the clearing. And in the clearing, faintly, a smudge of white. The most recent recorded visit to the church itself was in the fall of 2022. A documentary crew of 4, working on a folk horror project for a streaming platform, obtained permission from the Forest Service to spend one night in the clearing with cameras. They set up outside the church, not inside, on the explicit written instruction of their producer. 3 of the 4 returned in the morning. The 4th, a sound engineer named Marcus Trill, was found sitting inside the church in the innermost pew of the spiral, his headphones still on, his eyes open, unresponsive. He was airlifted to a hospital in Knoxville, where he remained in what doctors described as a waking catatonic state for 11 days before recovering enough to speak. His first sentence, according to the attending physician, was that the singing had been very beautiful. Asked what singing, he said only that it had come from behind the panel. Asked what panel, he did not answer. The nursing staff noted that for the 11 days he had been unresponsive, his lips had moved constantly, forming shapes that a hospital chaplain who watched him for 2 hours identified as the same 3 words repeated in a loop. The chaplain declined to say what the words were. He has since refused all interviews and has moved out of state. The footage the crew captured that night has never been released. The producer signed a non-disclosure agreement with the platform and has spoken publicly only once to say that what the cameras recorded did not match what the crew remembered experiencing, and that, in her professional opinion, the discrepancy was not the fault of the equipment. She would not clarify what she meant. The project was quietly shelved. The platform's public statement described creative differences. The church is still there. It is still white. The paint is still fresh. The bell still rings when the wind moves the wrong way. The clearing has not grown over. The ridge is officially closed to hikers, though the signs at the trailhead have been vandalized so many times that the Forest Service has stopped replacing them. Every few years someone requests a permit to study the site formally, and every few years the request is denied without explanation. A folklorist at a university in North Carolina who has spent 2 decades studying the region told a journalist in 2024 that she believes the church is not a religious building at all. She believes it is a door. She would not say to what. What is known is that no one built it, at least no one whose name survives. No congregation ever worshipped there in any recorded sense. No preacher was ever ordained to it. It appears in no denominational history of the region. It has no cornerstone, no dedication plaque, no ledger of members. The bell in the tower has no maker's mark. The wood of the pews cannot be dated by any of the standard methods, because the tree rings do not match any tree that has grown in North America in the last 400 years, and the samples sent to laboratories for analysis have twice been lost in transit and once been returned with the note that the wood was not identifiable. What is also known is that the man in the doorway of the Cassidy photograph is still there. Every subsequent photograph taken of the church from the same angle, from 1893 to the present day, shows him. He does not age. He does not move. His face is always in shadow. His hand is always raised. And in the photographs taken after 2011, the year Danielle Hoke went missing, some viewers have insisted that a second figure has begun to appear behind him in the doorway, smaller, further back. Indistinct. The Forest Service has not commented on this. The photographs have been examined by 3 independent analysts, and 2 of the 3 concluded that the second figure is a real artifact of the image and not a distortion. The 3rd analyst withdrew from the study. The people who live in the counties around the ridge do not go up there. They do not talk about the church in front of outsiders, and they do not talk about Elias Verin at all. If you ask, they will tell you that the ridge is a bad place, and that bad places are best left bad. They will tell you that the paint stays fresh because something keeps it fresh, and that the bell rings because something wants it to ring, and that the door is a door because something built it to be one. They will not tell you what is on the other side. But there is an old rhyme that mothers in the valley used to sing to children who wandered too close to the ridge in the summer months, and the last line of that rhyme, which is the only line most researchers have been able to reconstruct in full, goes like this. If the White House sings to you, do not answer, and do not look back, and do not run, because it already knows your name.